Listen, Bob, now that I know you're 8 years younger, you're also about 8 pounds too heavy. Now, I don't want to frighten you, but it's just possible that for every pound overweight could mean a year off your life.
Well, it doesn't frighten me because I haven't made any special plans for those last 8 years anyway.
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I'm going to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And Amy, what is the trope we're talking about today?
It's time to get fit, Jay. Come on, do your sit-ups, do your push-ups. Time to get in shape.
Yep, getting in shape, diets, exercise, all that stuff that everybody in this country loves to do all the time.
Yeah, zero problematic things on these shows.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot to talk about. This is a very sitcom-y subject, right? This was one where there was plenty to choose from, everything from Roseanne, Third Rock from the Sun. You know, you could go back, I think, your earliest sitcoms and your newest sitcoms.
Yeah, we had Munsters, we had The Addams Family, because, they always do the same episodes just like 2 weeks apart.
Yeah. It's not hard to find sitcom episodes about people trying to lose weight.
Yes.
And I think this has a lot of overlap with what we talked about with our Olympics episodes. You know, the sitcoms at large, they're meant to kind of make us feel better about our foibles, right? They show us everyday people and exaggerate, the silliness, the stupidness.
Yeah, they show us hot actresses worried about being not model-like.
They do that too, but certainly, there's a history of buffoonery is what I'm saying.
Yes.
You think of your George Jefferson or your, the guy from the Honeymooners, any one of these people, put him in a workout outfit and have him try to do exercise moves or something. Writes itself, right? That
yes,
juxtaposition.
I think, and you're kind of hitting on like the male version of It's Time to Go on a Diet can have a lot of comedy and it's all allowable. And then the female version of that is so tangled and twisted and it ends up being very emotional episodes. And so we wanted to make sure we had both men and women so we wouldn't just be one note in this podcast.
We should say we're skipping over the Full House episode because we've covered plenty of Full House, but that's one of those
Full Houses, as it were.
That's one of those very special episodes that gets into all the, eating disorder stuff that was definitely, it's been an issue forever, but was really in the headlines in the early 90s, I feel like. But okay, that's a good segue. Like you said, this is a very fraught subject for lots of people. What would you like to say about your experience with dieting, exercise, the multi-billion-dollar industry of weight loss in our world?
Yeah, well, so I'm one of these lucky people that I have just I've always been kind of active and sort of slim. I'm not like TV lady hot at all. Like I'm not like a model pretty, but like I'm sort of average and I don't have to like go crazy work really, really hard to like be sort of like a relatively not fat, like what people would call fat size. Now, that being said, for each of us, like fat is our own, like being fat in quotes is our own idea. And so, I've been shaped just like all of us have been shaped by the messages and society around me. And I do have kind of a challenging relationship with that, especially as I've gotten older, because I'm in my 40s, I'm starting perimenopause. And like, as my body changes, as my metabolism changes, there's this sense of of like there are things going on with my body that I don't have control over. And that is the kernel that so many people talk about. Like that's what starts an eating disorder. Yeah. It's you feel like you're out of control, so you try to gain control over something. And what's the easiest thing to do? To stop eating or to eat so much and purge. All of that, it's a measure of control. And so like I've noticed it over the past 5 years, just it's getting more challenging. And my relationship, my healthy relationship with my waistline is not as healthy as it once was.
And I've been pretty fortunate throughout my life in the sense that I was never somebody that, prior to the age of 30 or so ever worried about, oh, gee, what if I'm fat?
You're a beanpole.
Eating too much. Yeah, I was one of your just sort of naturally skinny chicken leg boys. And then around age 30, I started getting a little marshmallowy, as my dad put it.
Which is something that men can say to one another, but women cannot.
Yeah, I would argue it wasn't necessarily the nicest thing for him to say either. But
no,
nonetheless,
it hurt, but...
I started running in my early 30s. And, look, as somebody who has plenty of vices and has really struggled to, sort of change my lifestyle in all kinds of ways, that was one thing that came pretty easy to me. And I was young enough, I was at that sweet spot where my body was starting to change because of age and I was starting to gain weight, but I was young enough.
You were still 30.
Yeah. But when I started exercising regularly, I started going for a little 3-mile run, more or less every day. And I saw results from that pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
And, again, this was a time where I was smoking cigarettes, drinking heavily, so I don't want to sound like, oh, it's just that easy. I could do whatever I want. Like there were plenty of ways in which I was not in control, but that was one area in which I found like, oh, okay, I'll kind of make this adjustment. I live near this park that I like to run in. And ever since then, knock on wood, it's been mostly smooth sailing
like
for me.
Maintenance.
Yeah, I kept up that habit of running more or less every day. I have the diet of a mentally challenged 12-year-old. It has been pointed out to me many times.
We were out to dinner last night and the waiter asked if Jay was from the Midwest because he ordered his burger with no veggies.
Yeah. I don't like peppers on my burger, and so I get the ire
or lettuce
of these
and tomato.
Smart-ass waiters. But anyway, yeah, so again, I've been relatively fortunate in the sense that I feel like, I earn my being in good shape by doing my daily run and all that. But I would also acknowledge, like, it's not a Herculean effort for me to, keep up that modest level of exercise and keep the overall amount of food I eat pretty normal, even if like what it is not at all
healthy.
But the other thing I'll say, just sort of on a more general level, I feel like we as a society really have this sort of cognitive dissonance about this stuff. And we do individually. And of course, I was thinking about it a lot in these episodes. On the one hand, we have and always have had, you could argue it's getting a little bit better, this cultural hatred of fat people. And we love to make fun of them chide them and shame them and all that stuff.
Just in the Gimme a Break episode that we're going to watch,
absolutely relentless. And yet you go to the movies or to any, corner deli and it's like, won't you try our new Oreo flavored triple ice cream sundae Coca-Cola, meatball sub? Like everything is piling on everything. It's like, oh yeah, our smallest size is triple XL. What's the problem with that? There is this culture of excess.
My aunt's a woman of size and she says that being fat is the last prejudice that's allowed.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's the last, all the other, she's like, we're not allowed to talk about the gays anymore. My aunt is, she's a lot in many ways. She's like, we can't talk about the blacks. We can't talk about the gays, but we can still make fun of fat people like me.
Fat people and Italians are still on the table. Everybody else, maybe Irish. Everybody else, can't make fun of anymore.
20, he ain't heavy.
Yeah, so at this point, we've covered all 3 of Bob Newhart's sitcoms. We've covered The Bob Newhart Show, Newhart, and Bob. So now we're swinging back around to The Bob Newhart Show. This is the one where he's a psychiatrist.
Yes.
And yeah, this starts with Bob in the doctor's office. I feel like this is a pretty classic sitcom setup. I feel like a lot of episodes will start in a doctor's office.
Sure. Can we just pause on this for a second and the fact that Bob Newhart in this episode in like 1978 or whatever it is 41.
I've gotten you. At this point, nothing shocks me anymore.
He looks like 60. Like he looks like a grandpa.
Well, welcome to the 70s. I feel like we went through this with the mom and Charles in Charge, where I thought she was like 10 years older than me, and she's probably like 5 years younger than me.
Yes.
In that. Yeah, it's always depressing. But I definitely, knowing that this was going to have characters talking about their ages and stuff, I fully expected to have these actors that look like they could be my grandpa.
Oh, it's 1973, and he's that old. Jeez Louise.
So part of the whole setup for this is that his doctor is saying, "Oh, you look great for a 49-year-old man," and he's going, in his little Bob Newhart way. I'm 41. Yeah, and he goes, "Well, in that case, you're 8 pounds overweight," and so a lot of these episodes are going to follow this very basic structure, either doctor's orders or just somebody's own vanity or whatever. But it's like, here's the assignment. We've got to lose weight, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so he's like, it's super simple. The doctor tells Bob, it's super simple. All you have to do is just cut out carbohydrates, follow this diet. You're really going to like this diet because, and then he launches into this long explanation that describes like 3 or 4 diets I've heard of, all put into one. And then he says, and you have to work out, at least 3 times a week, and then just do about 20 minutes every day of some strength training as well. And then make sure here's a little calorie counter, count every single calorie, and especially watch out for those hidden carbohydrates. You don't always know where they are, so you got to make sure you do. And like he just is going on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah, he's mentioning fats and cholesterol, starches and sugars, hidden carbohydrates. Yes. He's got all these little pairs. And also, I want to track this subtrope. The person handing you the diet, right?
Right.
But at this time, a diet is like a document.
It can be written, although...
It's like a recipe.
By the way, when you go to the doctor and they tell you need to go on whatever one of these, diets that you need to go on, like the keto diet, which started out as a diet for people who were pre-diabetic, they would hand it to you on a piece of paper, and it would just be this big old long list of the things that you were allowed to eat.
It makes sense. Yeah, and it's funny, and I wanted to bring this up initially, that the whole concept of the word diet sort of means all these different things. To me, diet, quote unquote, is a big part of life in terms of your diet, what you eat, your overall choices. But then there's this specific thing of I'm on this diet. And it's like this copyrighted thing that is, on a little leaflet or something that the doctor
or that
hands
Atkins
you.
wrote a book about or whatever.
And that's the thing that I feel like this whole idea of being on a diet as a temporary thing always seemed strange to me, unless you're targeting a specific, I need to be in shape for a wedding or something
Jay,
like that.
speaking from a place of privilege, having never had to ever go on a diet.
I just don't understand, is the idea that once you do that and then you lose that weight?
So I think it's kind of evolved over time, right? When you see these shows from the 50s and 60s and the women are talking about, and it's usually women, but in this case it is a man in the 70s talking about being on a diet.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of watching your calories, lowering your intake for a period of time.
Yeah. Or sometimes it would be a specific, I only eat grapefruits and string cheese or something.
Exactly. So, but it was just something you were doing for a short period of time to kind of jumpstart your metabolism or jumpstart whatever it is, lose in his case, 8 pounds, right? He just needs to lose a little bit of weight. But then that was the idea that sort of became what we know today as yo-yo dieting, that you would only have to diet for a little while just to get back down to your fighting weight. But then with the rise of processed foods. And so in 73, we're kind of right in the middle of that. You know what I mean? We haven't haven't quite seen the explosion of American obesity in the early 70s the way we start to see it in the 80s and beyond, because people who were grown-ups in the early 70s weren't raised on processed foods and foods filled with hormones like we were. So they, like, their bodies were used to eating real food. And when you eat real food, you can just kind of, I'm going to lower my calories for a little while and lose weight. So, like, yes, a diet can be for a short period of time. And I think in older generations, when they didn't eat as many processed foods, when their bodies weren't predisposed to a certain level of obesity that many of us were exposed to when we were much younger because of all the not real foods we were eating, I think bodies did rebound faster. And for like my grandmother and my great grandmother, I remember them talking about, it was all about calorie restriction. So like, and that's still, you hear that from these like 108-year-old women who are like, what's your secret to longevity? Oh, no more than 800, 900 calories a day, which by the way is a starvation diet. But when you're 90 years old and your body isn't burning, as much as you used to, fine, you can eat 800 calories a day and get by.
Yeah. In this case, Bob's friend suggests an all-water diet, which I thought was kind of funny. He's going to walk around holding pitchers of water.
Yes. That was a joke because he was complaining about all the things he couldn't eat. He was like, whatever, I'll just drink a lot of water.
So this episode is going to sort of pivot a little bit, after Bob comes home and explains, I've got to do a diet, blah, blah, blah. We're going to start focusing on his birthday party.
Right.
Because
he doesn't want a surprise.
Yes. Bob and I are very similar in this regard.
I started laughing the minute he was like, is there some secret I should know? Like, are people going to pop out? And I was like poking Jay. I'm like, hee.
Yes, he doesn't want anything planned for his birthday. It was funny when he's calculating, he's talking about how he's been gaining like a pound a year or whatever.
Oh,
it is.
yeah.
Like
he gets on the scale after 5 hours of dieting and he's gained an eighth of a pound? Is that what he says?
I don't know.
Or something like that. Or he says more than half a pound. So like 0.8 pounds. And so he's annoyed that he's been dieting for 5 hours, but he actually gained weight since his appointment. And he's like, at this rate, I'll be 400 pounds by the time it's my birthday or something. He
calculates he'll be a little over 400 pounds in about a year. And so he goes to the gym with his friends. And this is a definite, sitcom subtrope.
1970s gym for sure.
Yeah. And they're just throwing out, they're throwing everything against the wall here. We've got an instructor with a funny German accent. We've got the other people in the class doing like weird physical comedy and stuff. We've got everybody dressed in weird outfits. Just a lot of like sitcom silliness to kind of, tide you over.
Oh, and the let's get physical jump leotards and tights that we've got on. I mean, this is like 10 years prior to Let's Get Physical, but it is fabulous. Like if you can imagine that scene from Mrs. Maisel, it's like, I think it's like episode 1 or 2 where she and her best friend go to their like workout class. This is what this looks like. It's so adorable.
Yeah. And they're pretty much just relying on that, right? Just on like, it's Bob Newhart who put him in a, sweatsuit or whatever they have him in, and it'll be funny.
He'll be uncomfortable.
Yeah, it'll be funny to see this little guy just try to keep up. And yeah, I feel like they don't have a ton of even like jokes and gags. It's more just like...
they have a very stern German woman who's going to run the class. She doesn't do any of the exercises. She just like barks out orders. Yeah. And she goes, don't worry, we go easy with our beginners class. And then it's like, upside down, bicycles, do this, do that. And she's like just yelling and like everybody's going really, really fast. And there's this woman next to Bob who is padded to look plumper than she is. Mm-hmm. And she just keeps like moving Bob into the next pose and like picking him up and moving him around. And he's startled because he's like, who is this lady grabbing me?
Yeah. So we get that, again, just like standard sitcom-y hijinks. And then back at his office, we have, I'm sure I made this comment last time we talked about this show, his secretary is one of these like sitcom royalty character actresses.
Yes.
She was Uncle Joey's girlfriend, I think, for one episode on Full House. She's kind of like, I don't want to say low rent, but like a sort of alternative Carol Burnett. I feel like she's got a similar look to her.
She looks more like Vicki Lawrence to me, but yeah, she's tall, she's lanky, she's got the red hair, she's got the big eyes, the big mouth.
And just that voice. She's not trying to be sexy. She's just going to be weird and wacky. You know, like she's just that kind of over-the-top personality. I don't think she has a ton to do in this episode, but she goes out to lunch and there's the funny comedy beat of like the elevators are broken. So she goes into the elevator and just like stands there awkwardly, Bob
waiting for the door to close.
Yeah, because it's like they don't know how to like politely move on with their lives.
Just like walk away. Bob's like, all right, have a good time at lunch, enjoy it. And he's like standing there staring at her, waiting for the elevator door to close. And she's standing in the elevator, staring back at him, waiting for the elevator door to close. And then the elevator repairmen come out of the other elevator and they're like, oh, that one's not working.
Right. So that's where we're going to get another sort of major subtrope of all of these things. The like one man's battle against temptation. You know, it's not always one man, but in this case, we've got Bob sitting there at his desk while these two elevator repair guys, these sort of blue collar, rough and tumble, sort of central casting guys sit down in they show up and immediately take their lunch break. I don't know if that was supposed to be like a joke on like the Teamsters on the set. And they're like describing to each other like little kids. They like want to trade their lunches.
Yeah,
so like, well, I got roast beef.
3 liverwurst and Swiss sandwiches. So he's like, oh man, I'd like something different. And the other guy has 3 different sandwiches. So they're trading.
And of course, Bob has his pitcher of water for lunch. He goes, his friend before he left says, I don't want to rub it in or anything, but I'm going to Mr. Bulk for lunch. That's the new smorgasbord restaurant. Yeah. So Bob is just listening to this description
of all the sandwiches.
Yeah. And I guess we don't see what happened. The guy wants to throw out.
Right. So the guy's like, oh, I still have this extra liverwurst and Swiss sandwich. And Bob's like, oh, I'll take it for you. Don't worry. There's a trash can right over here. So he grabs it and then he goes to throw it away and he can't make himself drop it because he is really, really hungry. And the guys are watching him and they don't hear the thunk in the trash can. So he just keeps pretending like he's throwing it. And then he finally, he realizes that they realize that he's actually going to take the sandwich. So he just kind of kicks the trash can like there's that I've made the thunk and walks into his office.
Yeah. So, he's going to eat this lunch. But then what we find out later, and again, recurring subtrope and all of these things, he went on a food rampage.
Yes, because he was withholding so much and he was so hungry that when he did the dam broke, he was just like, I'm going to eat all the things.
Right, but also the forbidden fruit syndrome. This thing of somebody, it's even called out in one of the other episodes that, I don't think about food until I'm on a diet.
Yeah,
He's somebody that probably didn't pay much mind to his eating habits, and now that he's not allowed
he's thinking about.
Yeah. And so he gets home and his wife shows him, he's got like a little rectangle of steak.
It looks like a tuna
plate.
steak. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to say, this is why I don't like getting steak in restaurants. Granted, in a restaurant, they give you other stuff, fries and beans and whatnot. But that thing of like steak is so good. But what it looks like when Emily gives it to him is what steak looks like to me at a restaurant, especially like filet mignon or something. It's like a little cube, and I prefer burgers and stuff where there's just like more to it. But in any case, he sort of comes clean to her and describes his whole food rampage. Oh, it didn't stop there. Then I went down to...
I ate this, and then I ate lots of peanut brittle.
Yeah, exactly. And then he goes into the bathroom, and that's where the surprise party is, right? Total violation, I think. Like, this was insane to me. You put people in somebody's bathroom.
No, they put them in the bedroom, but he was going into the bedroom to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still don't like
So they
it.
were all hiding in the bedroom because Emily had made him understand that this was just going to be like a quiet dinner party.
Yes,
for
she lied.
him and his like 5 friends, like the neighbor neighbor in the office, his like office mate, and the secretary, and like
the cast of the show,
right?
basically.
Like one other guy. So that's who was coming over, and that's who was there. And then everybody, like his doctor, the nurse from the doctor's office, and all these other people come out
big
of
surprise.
And he's like rolling his eyes because he didn't want this.
And that's pretty much it, right? Like we get a bedroom scene with them at the end.
Yeah,
there's been a recurring thing.
There's a couple of different scenes. Like he and Emily kind of have a little bit of a tense conversation about weight, where he is, he's upset that he has to go through all this. But her whole point is like, look, you can do whatever you want, but if your doctor tells you to do something, like they know, and you should probably listen to them. Very 1970s. Nobody says that anymore, right? But so she's just like, I want you to be around. I don't want you to, end up having a heart attack or doing, getting so far gone that like you're not healthy. And he's like, all right. And she's like, I got you a present, but I think I might need to take it back if you're going to, go in a different direction. And he's like, no, I want to know what you got me. And so it turns out she got him this suit that is the waist is like 2 sizes smaller than what he currently wears.
Aspirationally tailored, as they say.
Exactly. And she was like, I thought it might be a goal, something for you to shoot for because you like this suit so much. And he's like, oh. And then we don't see what happens in between. We just get a tag then at the end of him.
Something I've learned about ladies, they don't like it when you do this strategy. Don't buy them clothes 2 sizes smaller and say maybe this will be a goal.
You can grow into this, honey.
You can shrink into it.
Right? So he is wearing an oversized t-shirt to cover the fact that the pants don't actually fit because Bob Newhart in real life didn't actually lose his gut. But anyway, so he's got these pants on and he's got this oversized t-shirt on and he's like, look, Emily, the pants fit. Like, I've done my diet. And she's like, oh, Bob, yay. And then they have sexy times.
Yeah, well, he says, I weighed the same thing I weighed on my wedding night. And so she calls back the joke from earlier. She says, oh, just give me 45 minutes. Because there was a mention of how on their wedding night, it took her 45 minutes to get ready. So yeah, look, a lot of subtropes that we already mentioned that are going to track across all of these episodes. But one difference, at least from some of them, is all male point of view, right? Again, sign of the times. For one thing, I guess Emily's probably a little younger than him. And so I think we're supposed to just buy, I mean, it could have to do with age or not, that this just isn't an issue for her right now. Like this just, and I think this might be the attitude of the show in general. She doesn't have issues. This is about Bob and his problems.
Right, exactly.
And so she's going to be his support system. And so, yeah, this is one where the whole sort of body dysmorphia and, the ways that society puts pressures on women, that's not on our minds in the early 70s.
At all.
It's more about, oh, your doctor is a big pain in the butt because he's going to tell you to go on a diet. And so we get, just like we said, the forbidden fruit, the food rampage, the funny gym class scenes and all of that stuff. And let's see how it continues in Gimme a Break.
Season 1, Episode 5, Do or Diet.
Yeah, so this is one of 2 shows, right? Gimme a Break and My Sister Sam.
Yep.
We had never covered. You specifically had either fond memories of these or curiosities or something.
Yeah, so I watched both. I think I watched My Sister Sam more than I watched this, although this was on for, Gimme a Break was on for 6 years. I think Gimme a Break, it started in 81. So I would have only seen the later episodes when Joey Lawrence was in it. Joey Lawrence joined in like season 3 or something as like the new little replacement kid because the older 3 girls were getting older. He's a foster son to Nell Carter, who is like a housekeeper / mother figure to the 3 girls and their father, who is the police chief. So how does this all happen? Well, Nell Carter was friends with their mom, and their mom died before the show even started. So like we only find out about any of this in flashback. When the show starts in season 1, everybody's just like, yep, dead mom. Yeah, this lady is
right out of the playbook.
Yeah.
And granted, this, if it started in 81, it predates a lot of the shows I would compare it to, but it does just seem like sitcom autopilot, or as they might say now, written by AI, you know, just like, oh, black housekeeper, white family, dead mom, 3 kids, gruff dad, I don't know.
Yeah,
you know.
So her whole story is that she's a singer, and she was like a failed nightclub act, and she was like a failed singer because she's large.
I have to say, never has there been a stronger connection of voice singing the theme song to character.
Give me a break.
I didn't know for sure if it was the same person per se, but just like this just sounds exactly like what this character looks like.
Yes, and it is her singing the theme song. She sang all 3 versions of the theme song. There was one theme song they used for a couple years, and then they did 2 different versions, and then they wrote a new one, but it sounded an awful lot like the old one anyway. So this show's all about this family, and of course all the fun little dynamics of like the dad being this gruff police chief and the girls.
Very gruff.
Yes.
This guy reminded me of Lawrence Tierney, the actor. He's the boss in Reservoir Dogs, and he played Elaine's dad on Seinfeld.
Yes.
Just this tough SOB, and you can't see his eyeballs because they're always in little slits, and he's got that kind of voice,
you know, like
yes,
really
exactly.
like that.
And that is exactly it. Much of the comedy from the shows comes from like the girls growing up and him not understanding that like there's an episode where the oldest daughter has an IUD, but it causes a problem, and so she has to go to the hospital for these stomach cramps, and the dad loses his mind because she has an IUD, and then we find out that like she and her mom had gone together before her mom died to go get the IUD. So it was like the mom was very clearly the one raising these girls.
Yeah.
And that's why she says to her friend Nell, you've got to be there for my girls when I go because I've married this jackass kind of a thing.
Right out of the sitcom playbook. But the dynamic in this family, when this show starts, like, it is wild. It reminded me of the family dynamics in a Rob Zombie movie, you know, where they're just like showing you these horrific scenes before they even get to the scene with the Fat Club that is, you know, really wild. He's making remarks like, you take away her trough and she gets mad, you know, like he's just throwing around like the most horrible insults to Nell about her being fat. She's saying about herself, she goes, if I gain any more weight, I'll have to trade in my nightgown for a hefty bag. It's just like, Jesus, for the early 80s, like they've got that 90s, like super mean, you know, sort of like teeth on the jokes down pat.
Yeah. And that is a marker of this show. And that continues throughout the series, and the critics were totally split on it, right? Like, I mean, you've got a lot of the critics just being like, this show is awful and these people are horrible and like no one cares about you. And then you had the other side being like, oh, it's acerbic and they go, you know, toe to toe. So like neither one of them ever gets the one up. They just always are going back and forth. And it's like, yeah, you can just sort of see the beginning of that Fox mentality.
Yeah, you definitely, I think at that time wouldn't have the awareness of like any sort of racial or class undertones that might maybe make it even more uncomfortable. But yeah, you just have everybody.
No, they're pressing on those on purpose, like over and over again. I mean, they do a show later on, I think in season 1, where one of the girls gets called a Polak at school and gets all upset, comes home, and because the dad and Nell, are bickering so much, they won't listen to her. So she screams at them and is like, would you like it if they called you an N-word to Nell? And then runs out of the house because she said the word, and they both are like turn their anger on her.
Yeah.
But like, and then they catch up with her wherever she is and all is forgiven. And it's like, what the hell is going on with this crazy ass show?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is also, you know, we should say it's one of these like very clearly shot on video kind of like, it's just from a time I feel like when it's like, not all of these need to be so good, right? Like I imagine this one, maybe, was it even a prime time or was it like maybe one of those 7 p.m. shows?
No, it was an absolute primetime show. It ran for 6 seasons. Like they were, you know, solidly where they needed to be. They had at the end of, I think, like season 5 or whatever, all of the girls were like too old now.
Yeah,
so they got rid of all of them. Joey Lawrence was the cute one. Well, he was already in it. But then they moved to New York City because by this time the dad has died. So they and the girls are all grown. So they moved to New York City and it's Nell and Joey Lawrence. And then they bring in Matthew Lawrence as his kid brother he didn't know he had. I mean, the show is crazy.
Yeah. So this, again, we don't get any doctor's visit or anything with this, but we get just the sort of goal that she wants to lose weight.
Yes.
And she's got a club called Porco.
Yes.
Another one of these hilarious, reverse engineered initialisms.
It stands for something, right?
People organized to reduce something obesity.
Kicking obesity. It's not to reduce.
Okay.
It's like people organized.
Maybe to really kick obesity or
but
to
I remember
radically...
the K was kick.
Okay, that explains it. Yeah, so it's, they meet conveniently in Nell's living room. Mm-hmm. It's this small club of actresses, characters that are all overweight. And this is, I gotta say, this gives Mr. Ed and the Yellow Face a run for its money for the most disturbing and offensive thing we've ever watched for the podcast.
This is horrible.
They sing a song that goes like...
But it's like their welcome song. It's like, all right, you're new to the club, so we're going to sing the song to you. And they're all like laughing as they sing this.
Yeah, there's this weird, I guess the humor is just I don't know, all of this is just funny.
It's that thing of if I can make fun of myself, then you can't hurt me.
Right.
If I, Chris Farley talked about that, right? Like just being the fat guy in the room, you had to make fun and make fun of yourself before anybody else did.
So I guess that's the thinking, but it is wild. The lyrics to this song are, "You're a disgusting fatso. No one can even stand the sight of you."
It's awful.
Those are things that they say. The word disgusting is said 3 or 4 times in the course of this scene. And again, it is one of those things where the meanness, the flagrancy of it is part of the humor. So yes, they have a little oath they have a little song. They all take turns giving their sort of origin story like you would in a 12-step program. And it always is things where their parents incentivized them with food. It's always a funny story where it's
how they ended up with
I wasn't allowed to go to sleep until I ate all the peanuts and, whatever it is, some quote unquote funny story of
her Nell's story is her first memory is her mom waving a cookie at her so that she would walk. And then the guy next to her is like, well, did you learn how to walk? And she was like, I learned how to run before I could walk, because she ran towards the cookie.
Yeah, you have this sort of Porco Eaters Anonymous meeting or whatever. And, we truly cannot overstate every single line that is spoken is this sort of self-effacing, mean-spirited fat joke that often contains words like disgusting, can't stand the sight of you. And again, I think you're right about, it's that, we're getting out in front of it. It also is just something I think you're supposed to laugh at, it's just so extreme, these things they're saying.
The audience is dying laughing. They think it's hilarious. And that's the thing. I don't think, I think you're taking your 24 mentality to it in saying that you're supposed to laugh because it's so extreme. No, I honestly think that this is where we were at the time. But it's let's make fun of myself and I will call myself gross and fat and disgusting.
Absolutely. But for example, when the new member comes and they sing the song and then at the end, the newcomer says, that was really beautiful. And that gets a laugh. And so I'm just saying that's that sort of opposite day thing of they're saying stuff that's really mean, even though they're welcoming the new person. It's all in that stew. But then we get an interesting ripple in this story that happens. The dad comes home.
Right.
He's, arguing with her or whatever. He's getting all mad.
They were telling him at the dinner the night before when they were trading jibes that he was just as overweight as she was. And so he's like, I'm fine. I'm just built like this. And then he comes in the door, and they immediately start singing the song, like, hey, a new member, and start singing the, you're fat and disgusting song to him, and he gets all mad, and Nell's like, whoa, 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 he's not a member, this is his house, and they're like, oh, you should join, and he's like, what? And she's like, come on, let me take you to the kitchen, but then they kind of have a heart-to-heart, and he realizes, wow, like, they thought I should join the group, maybe I am a little bit pudgier than I should be, and so then they decide to go on a diet together.
Well, you're skipping over. He has a heart attack.
He doesn't have a heart attack. He has an acid reflux attack. She calls it a gas attack.
All right, that explains, because I thought that he had a heart attack.
No.
And then when they get back, and then it goes to a commercial, they come back, and
she's like, next time it won't be a gas attack. Yeah. You need to start taking care of yourself.
Okay, so he collapses. I was incredulous, like, oh, shouldn't this come back and we're in a hospital? But okay, that makes more sense. He has, some sort of, heartburn or acid reflux or whatever. But yeah, that's his wake-up call, so to speak. And so we get, it's further along in the episode, but same exact structure now as the Bob thing. We've had our wake-up call, and now doctor's orders or whatever it is, it's our mission to lose weight. But this time we get the fun thing of the two of them doing it together.
Yes.
And what a relief this was. I'm going to say the same caveat that I always do, that we're not, Mr. Rogers. It's not like we need to have everybody always getting along in order to enjoy a show. But after the vitriol and the toxicity of the first half of this show, to finally have Nell and this grumpy old dad character be kind of on the same page and be sort of like kind of helping each other, and they're both together trying to resist the temptation to eat. So they're watching TV together. They start turning on the television, and they're seeing commercials for food all the time. Like, they're describing the food in all these tantalizing ways, which got me thinking, I feel like this is something that we don't have as much of anymore. I'm sure we still have it, of course. And maybe it depends where you live and what streaming services. Yeah, I feel like back in the day, like, so much of advertising was seeing pizza crusts and the cheese.
Oh yeah, now it's just, at least for
insurance,
us, and
I
would say pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. I think insurance companies and pharma companies and car companies have sort of taken over a lot of the advertising.
Maybe it's just our age.
Yeah, that's
I bet
part
there's
of it.
food on like Saturday morning cartoons and toys.
Yeah,
still.
I'm sure you've got your Domino's commercials and stuff.
Oh,
but
we saw
a
Domino's commercial the other day.
Yeah, but I think by and large in the 80s and 90s, there was a ton of food commercials around, a ton of pizza commercials and things.
Well, and commercials weren't chosen. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They were chosen by the show based on like the demographic of the Nielsen ratings of the people who watch that show. But I think, part of it is that we're older. So like we are getting targeted with way more pharma ads. Although the pharma ads make me laugh because they always think that we're gay going out and like partying. Like the pharma ads are always like, you want to be on PrEP, don't you?
I think it's partially targeting. I think it has more to do with pharma companies and insurance companies have all the money. And so they're the ones that run the most ads.
So they couldn't get away with they both are sitting there with their celery sticks and they're trying to eat their celery sticks while watching these commercials about all this delicious food.
There's a funny part, I think, before they resort to the commercials. He's like, let's try talking about something. And so he opens up the newspaper and he goes, they're rezoning 3rd Street for commercial development. And that I just thought was a funny, a conversation.
But then he lists all the things that it might be. And one of them's like one of them's a pizza place. And they're like, lasagna's really good.
That gets them onto lasagna. I have to say, jaw on the floor when she says, my great-grandfather was owned by an Italian.
Yeah.
Cue the audience laughter.
It was so like apropos of nothing. She was like, oh yeah, I come by it honestly. My great-grandfather was owned by an Italian. And I was just like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and look, on the one hand, hey, absolutely. This is, having...
Yeah, are we post-racial? Are we just talking about who owned who?
Well, that's the thing. I could...
What is this?
There is definitely a world in which, whatever, Donald Glover, Dave Chappelle, any number of comedic minds can make comedy out of very, very uncomfortable subjects like that. But that's sort of what I meant before about the racial thing, where it's like, do they realize how edgy this is? I don't know if edgy is the right word, but like, do they realize what they're saying when they're casually making a joke about how her family was owned by an Italian and that's why she's good at making lasagna?
Yeah.
But
I mean, I don't know. I bet you it was a white person who wrote it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was a little bit floored by that, but then they moved right along. Like she said it with a plum, had a little grin on her face. And I was like, whoa, okay, here we go. Yeah. And then they went into the kitchen, and this scene in the kitchen was hilarious.
This is great. And again, now we've got these two characters on the same page, no more of the horrible insult humor. And they're, the whole thing of like, oh, well, just taste the lasagna because we need to find out, like, scientifically.
Yeah,
if it's
smell
still
has
okay.
no calories, so let's smell it.
Right.
And then they're like, oh, I can't tell, because she was saying that the lasagna she made the couple nights before was a little bit off. The girls liked it, but she could tell that something was off. And he was like, oh, I didn't notice, but let me go and I can smell it. And so they were smelling it and they couldn't tell what it was. And then they tasted it and he's like, you know what? Maybe it's basil. Maybe it's the basil that's missing. And she was like, no, it wasn't the basil.
No, I thought it was weird that he was saying basil like Basil Rathbone. Is that how you say it? I always thought you said basil when you talk about the leaf thing that goes into...
So my friends from the UK and my friends who speak English that are in Europe say basil, but everybody I know in the States says basil. So I think it's just one of those basil. Pronunciation things.
I found it funny when he said it, like Basil of Baker Street.
Yeah,
but
when I lived overseas, I said basil, so I would be understood, but that was just code switching.
Yeah, but yes, the sort of enabling I thought was very funny and very true to life. That thing of like, well, we have to taste a little bit, otherwise we won't know what's wrong, and then they get into that thing that is at the heart of all sort of like addictions or like the difficulties that we have changing our habits when they go, we'll be really good tomorrow. I won't eat until next Tuesday,
That's right.
It rings so familiar to me with drinking, smoking, any of that stuff. The vowing for the future. Right. And
I'm going to do this now, but this is the last time.
Right. And a lot of times it ends up, your mind starts tricking itself and going, oh, I'm so sure that I'm going to clean up my act tomorrow that I can actually behave even more excessively
because
now.
This is my last stand, so I'm going to go crazy. And that's what they do. He's like, oh, you know what? While that's heating up, they decide they need to heat up the lasagna after having some of it. Right. And then there's a bit where she cuts off a piece and he's like, don't you want any? And then she plops that big ass piece back in the main tray and the whole tray goes in the oven. And then they're standing there and then he says something about like, oh, it goes so good with garlic bread. So she's like, you get the butter and the garlic, I'll get the bread. She starts cutting it up and he's like, oh, you know what? I haven't had a sardine sandwich. He sees the sardines. He's like, I haven't had a sardine sandwich since I was a kid. And she's like, well, if you're grabbing that, you better grab the bologna and cheese because I'll be damned if I'm going to stand here watch you eating a sardine sandwich while this is heating up without a sandwich of my own. And so then she's like shoving rolled up slices of bologna in her face. By the way, I used to eat bologna sandwiches as a kid and they are so disgusting.
Yeah,
I think about it now and I'm just like, how did I eat that? That's so gross.
Yeah, no, I agree. This is, again, just like Bob, we're getting the beginnings of a food rampage, that thing. And I gotta say, I like this. After the beginning of the show.
We get to see the food rampage, not just hear Bob tell about it in the next scene.
And just the steady escalation of this, that we've been with these two characters, nobody else, for this whole middle act.
And they've just been like the eating the celery sticks and just wanting more, smelling the lasagna, eating the lasagna.
Yeah, the gradual escalation. And so, now that they're finally going crazy, and so we get them just like tearing the kitchen apart and just, food everywhere.
They keep having ideas of like the things they're going to eat while they're waiting for the lasagna. And then and then it like cuts away, it goes to commercial or whatever, and then it comes back and it's a tight shot on like the sort of cupboard pantry that's next to the fridge, and there's pasta just like hanging out of the pantry. And it starts to zoom out to a wide shot, and the kitchen is crazy. I mean, it is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then the youngest daughter, Sam, walks in and she's like, what happened? Did the refrigerator explode?
Yeah. And then we get the ending
because it's the next morning.
Yes.
And they have like gone way overboard. They're both having bromo seltzer in the morning because they feel so
they're
full and sick.
hungover essentially. It's like, you know, if you woke up after a bender, but it was like a food bender. But then the button on this episode was as shocking to me as anything else. The little girl comes and she says she wants to skip breakfast.
Well, she only has like 2 bites of her breakfast because she's like, I got to go to school. I'm running late. And they're like, you know, the dad's like, you have to finish your breakfast. The dad
wants her to finish breakfast. And then Nell undermines him and says, no, let her go so she won't be fat like us.
Yeah.
And so what they're saying, and he's like, yeah, I guess you're right. And so like after all of the ups and downs of this episode, what they're settling on is like, yeah, let's advocate for the kids skipping breakfast so they won't be fatzos like us. Roll credits.
Well, I don't think it was so much the kids skipping breakfast. They were calling back that idea that like that all of the stories started with like a bad, you know, one of the stories was my mom always made me clean my plate. And that's what the dad was doing, was like making her clean her plate, even though she's like, I'm not hungry. Like I had 2 bites. I've done my duty, but I'm not hungry. And he's like, we won't let food go to waste. And then Nell was like, we could have fed an entire country with just the food we ate last night.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, fair enough. And she's like, you can go to school. You don't have to finish your breakfast. We don't want you to end up with this same weird relationship with food that we have. Now, you're not wrong. Like, they're definitely, you know, kids do need to eat a breakfast, but it was cereal. It wasn't like it was something super healthy anyway. She had a couple bites. I think it's fine. Also, it would be a different story if we were in the My Sister Sam episode where the kid, the 16-year-old, is like, I don't want to eat.
Yeah.
But it's for a different reason. Like, like this girl doesn't have a problem. She eats when she's hungry, you know, and she's saying, I'm not hungry. Please don't make me eat this. I don't want it.
Yeah. All right, moving on to My Sister Sam.
Season 1, Episode 8, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall.
Yeah, so I had never watched this one either, I think. But this one, at least, I had some memory of.
Well, it came out a little later.
Right.
I think it was like, what, 87, 88 or something like that? 86,
so I would have
87.
been vaguely aware of it. The thing is, I think my little sort of Mandela effect was that Alyssa Milano was in this, but then I realized that's just because she's Sam in Who's the Boss?
Oh, okay.
And I didn't really watch that show either. So it's like, oh, some cute girl on a TV sitcom with brown hair called Sam, and maybe that's Alyssa Milano. You know, like I didn't know, I wasn't really familiar with either of them, and I think my mind kind of mushed them all together.
Well, so I was a heavy rerun watcher of Mork and Mindy.
Okay.
And Pam Dauber, the older sister in this, is the wife, who eventually becomes Mork's wife, but she's Mindy.
She's Mindy, of course.
In Mork and Mindy. And so this was a vehicle. This was like her production company, her working with CBS. Like, she apparently looked for years for a script until something spoke to her. But because she had been such a star, this was, you know, she was able to kind of like have her own production company and do a show. And so that's what this was. It only ended up running for 2 seasons. It was in between, here's a little Bob Newhart connection. It ran in between Kate and Allie and Newhart. And so my mom always watched Kate and Allie, and that's why I saw this show all the time.
Yeah, my mom watched that
this
too.
show. And then this is the one that they moved after like the first season. They moved it to the Saturday to go up because it had such good ratings. They were like, oh, we'll put it up against Facts of Life. And then it just tanked. And they didn't end up airing the entire season 2 on whatever CBS or whatever. And so only in syndication did you see the other ones.
When I looked up the episode, episodes, the season 2 was incomplete. Now, didn't you also say one of these women was murdered?
Right. So this was like one of these early instances, just like John Lennon, of a stalker. So this girl, her name is Rebecca Schaefer or something like that. She plays the younger sister. She is Patty.
Yeah.
So Sam is Mindy. She's the older sister.
Right. The Spencer of the relationship, if you will.
Right. So Patty, the younger sister, played by Rebecca Schaefer, she had a stalker that started stalking her when she was, a young actress and was on the show. And so a year after production finished, the cops were like not helpful in keeping the stalker away from her. She had had many run-ins with both the stalker and the police and trying to like get the police to do something about it. But in a classic case of nobody believes women, she was shot coming out of her home by this crazy dude from the Midwest who was obsessed with her.
Yes. Pretty horrible. Anyway, this episode starts with...
Easy transition there into a fun, light comedy.
What can we say? We've talked about lots of messed up stuff on this episode, and that is maybe takes the cake even more so than the Fat Club. Shooting your actress in the face. No good. Don't do it.
But also, this one, I think, this one gets the closest to, you've got two young women talking about the way, like all the weird society pressures.
Yes.
One of these women works in advertising and is actively casting lingerie models
We're gonna get all
throughout this episode. And so that, like, all of this kind of comes to the fore. Still doesn't hit America Ferrera's Barbie monologue. Like, it doesn't do what that does. We're taking a step in the right direction.
Yeah, we're getting into the notions of body dysmorphia. We're getting into the notions of the media representation of women and all that stuff. So yes, a much more sort of modern take on this. You already sort of explained it. The premise of this show is like iCarly. We get the big sister, right, who's raising the little one. Are the parents dead?
Yeah, the parents died, and Patty is supposed to be around 16. I was always kind of incredulous that she was that young, but they look like they're the same age.
Yeah, so this episode is going to start out with a photo shoot that's going to sort of kick off this whole story that's happening. These are like the designing women. Everything, the home, work, it's all the same, right? It all happens in their flat.
She has an apartment upstairs from her studio.
Right. So she is doing a photo shoot with a model, and Patty, the sister, is there. Now, we watched this on a sort of crappy YouTube, dub or whatever, but the younger sister, the older sister, and the fashion model are basically the same person.
Yeah, they all
look about 20 years old. Yeah. They've all got light brown hair.
Well, so the fashion model had a little lighter hair, that was her difference. She's taller and she's half naked. So the thing that I remember about the show was that Sam, the older sister, who's supposed to be 29, is very cool. Like, she had that kind of hip girl 80s
a little new
look.
Wave, right? A little blazers and things.
Exactly, but not with the huge shoulder pads became the rage, right? She was so cool. She had the coolest outfits. And then Patty, the younger sister, so after their parents died, she'd been living in Oregon with their aunt and uncle, and she was like, this isn't for me, packed up all her stuff, shows up on Sam's doorstep on the first episode and is like, surprise, I'm living with you now. And so that's the setup for the show. So you have this raising Helen sort of situation where it's this young woman, and now all of a sudden she's raising a teenager, and they are sisters, so they're closer in age and are having more real experiences like each other, but then she has to realize that she is the adult in so many situations. And they all three of these women, like you were saying, the model and the two sisters, they basically all wear the same damn size. They are all very tiny. But in this episode, they have purposefully put the two sisters in more blousy clothing so that when they talk about themselves as being frumpy, we
don't really,
fit.
we have to take their word for it.
Right. I mean, like, they're very tiny women.
Yeah, no, these women are in good shape. Look, you could argue, hey, that's the problem with all these, stupid Hollywood things, that even when they're supposed to be fat, they're not. Or you could say, well, that's the whole point of it, as we're going to get into. She sees herself as overweight, even though she's not. But starting at the beginning here, this model is sort of making small talk with Patty, the younger sister, and kind of saying like, oh yeah, the way that I get to be in good shape like this is I can't eat any of the stuff that you eat. She goes, they mentioned potato chips, and she goes, do you know how many calories are in 1 ounce of potato chips?
Which 161.
A very strange way to phrase that, though. I've never heard of, I guess you might have like
a serving
potato chip bags being measured in ounces and stuff, but it was funny to me that she didn't just say
like
how many calories are in a potato chip. It was
right.
An ounce of potato chips, like when you mash them up and put them into a little measuring cup.
Or when you are thinking in servings and you're counting your calories, and she very clearly is one of those people.
And so she is telling young, impressionable Patty, yeah, look, the way I get to be like this, you got to exercise all the time, you got to go on the Golden Gate diet, right? You can't just eat whatever you want. And so we have another case of she gives her a copy of the Golden Gate diet.
She writes the diet down while they're all like having other things going on. She writes the diet down on a piece of paper and hands it over to Patty and is like, hey, like I looked like you when I was 16. And Patty was like, oh God, like how horrible do I look? And she's like, I look like you when I was 16. I worked really, really hard to get this career in this body, and this is what I did. And so she hands her the diet.
Right. And as you said, this whole thing is weirdly ironic because in actuality, Patty, the real life person we're looking at, is a professional actress who probably is on the Golden Gate diet or some
very
such
slender.
thing. Yeah.
But anyway, so and then they all start kind of like everybody in the office, right? There's like a manager guy that's like kind of skeevy, like he's always like wanting to hit on the women, not the women that he works with, but like the women
he's
that
got
are
a sort
in there.
of like a Joe Mantegna vibe.
Yeah, and he's a recognizable like sitcom actor.
Yeah,
so is the other woman that works with them. Her name's Jenny O'Hara. You've seen her in a million things.
When we were watching it, I asked you if it was Shirley MacLaine because it would not make sense for an actress of that caliber to be in My Sister Sam, but she really, really reminded me of her. And also, partially because of this crappy YouTube dubbing, at the beginning, I thought at first I was looking at like their grandma. And then as the episode went on, I'm like, no, I think this is supposed to be Sam's peer that's like the same age as her.
She's not the same age as her, but she is someone that works in the agency.
Gotcha.
So Sam is a photographer, and then she has she has an agency that she kind of works with, even though she's like a freelance photographer out of her house. And so they're in the process of casting for another round of this same lingerie commercial that this other woman was there shooting for, but this time it's a different negligee. And so she's just going through people and being like, she's too short-waisted. No, she's got too much
hair.
They're
flipping through photos, model headshots and whatnot.
And they're just kind of saying, no, for all these very like flip reasons, like, that this won't work on her because she's got wider hips and this is a tiny thing. And so, the way casting agents do, and they're not making any bones about it. But then later on in the episode, we get the callback because Patty, young impressionable Patty, has been hearing all of this. And she's like, you won't cast a woman because she's short-waisted. Like, what do you mean I don't have to worry about this stuff? And Sam's like, that's different. That's advertising. And she's like, but it's not. Like, everywhere I go, all I see are skinny women everywhere. Skinny women on couches, skinny women on cars, like skinny women selling yogurt. Like, I can't do anything without this being thrust in my face. And then, of course, Sam doesn't decide to change the whole industry. But what she explains at the end is that like these are two separate things. Like being a real person is different than the people you see on TV, and you can't let what you see on TV affect you, which rings so false nowadays because like of course it affects you. It's like the whole world around you is like in the media.
Yeah, well, what she's saying is true, but that's sort of the start of the conversation of like it's not digging into like why do we portray people that are like when you're watching an insurance commercial.
No, it was just accepted that the whole point of advertising is we're selling a fantasy, so it's got to look like this.
Advertising, any entertainment. And that's one thing that it continues to be an interesting question, because of course, I've cast things when I work on things. Of course, the idea that we would want the people in our movies and plays and TV shows to be nice to look at and attractive, makes sense. It is just a question of how much of that is too much. At what point does it go from having a sort of glamorized version of reality to a completely false and dangerous, version of reality?
And I totally check myself on this all the time when I'm shopping. If the images of the thing, the clothes or the whatever that I'm looking at, usually clothes, are on a person who is bigger than me, I'm like, ooh, that dress won't look good on me. I don't like that. And when there's bra commercials or Dove commercials and I see people's fat rolls, I'm like, ooh, gross. I don't want to see that. But then I realize that's horrible. I have fat rolls. Why am I being so shamey about this stuff? But it is still my knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, and we're getting a little bit better about that, in overt ways, you see now, there are billboards with oversized people and stuff, and in a more subtle way, little by little, you're seeing, I think, a little bit of a sort of pedaling back. For example, when we watched the How I Met Your Mother episode, the ex-girlfriend of Barney's that did the rain dance, I remember thinking, Jesus, this girl is so freaking skinny, and that show's 2010 or whatever, and thinking yeah, sure, she's hot, I guess, but she would be just as attractive, if she had a little meat on the bones. And I feel just like they always say, oh yeah, you go back in the day, you look at Marilyn Monroe, she had a little junk in the trunk, I feel we're getting back to that a little bit, maybe a little bit back from the brink that we were in the late 90s, early 2000s of skeletons. We want skeletons.
But at the same token, Kim Kardashian, who is very tiny, couldn't fit into Marilyn Monroe's dress. So let's
Isn't
be
her
real
giant butt
about
her whole thing.
Yeah, but let's be real. It was her waist that they couldn't zip it over. Let's be real about the size. Marilyn Monroe was a size 10, but that was a 1950s size 10. My mom's wedding dress in 1974, also a size 10, and the last time I could fit into that was when I was in middle school and I tried it on. I definitely don't wear a size 10 today, but that's because sizes keep changing.
Sure. I'm just saying that there was the sort of trends and tastes evolve, and we tolerated or even liked a little bit of curviness at some point, and then that really kind of went away completely.
Well, and that's always kind of you've got the sort of heroin chic thing that happened for a while. There was also the the Twiggy days in the 60s. There's always there's been ebbs and flows, but even the flows, even when the largest people that are allowed to be large, right? Are still not even average woman size. And I'm speaking about women because it's usually women, right? And that's the issue that I think they're trying to get at, is that the girl who's called the fat girl in the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants is America Ferrara, who was a little rounder than Blake Lively and Amber Tamblyn at the time.
It's also, to me, it's because when you're talking about people that young, it's just oh God, because they're so small just from being so young. But in any case, we're going to get the same sort of story beats. We're going to get Sam going through the story beats with the other characters we had, but that's almost going to be a sort of smaller part of this. We're going to get the forbidden fruit thing of Sam kind of losing her mind, staying on the diet.
No, not Sam, Patty.
Well, no, Patty is going to stick with it. I'm talking about the middle part, because Patty actually takes to the diet. Sam is the one that really
Patty's
struggles.
young. Like, she starts losing weight immediately, and she is getting that, like, reinforcement. Like, she loses 2 pounds in 2 days. She's like, this diet's great. She loses 5 pounds in a week. She's like, wow, I really like that. By the end of the week or 2 weeks that they agreed to stay on the diet, Sam is done.
Yeah,
and like all of her coworkers are like, are you off your diet? Because you're being nice. Like, she apparently had been cranky and mean for days and days, and everyone was sick of her. She was always craving food. She had only lost 1 pound or 2. Like, she didn't really lose any weight. And so she was like, I hate this diet.
Yeah. She's the one that says the only time I ever think about food is when I'm on a diet.
Right.
So yeah, she's going through that whole thing of the forbidden fruit and the just kind of losing her mind.
Yeah.
But then that story sort of ends. Like, the diet was for a fixed amount of time, like we got into before. And she's like, okay, it's over. And, not for me. I'm going back to my normal thing. And then Patty is the one that, like I said, has kind of taken to it.
Yeah,
and so
she
now,
decides she's going to stay on it. And she is just saying no to all food. She's basically just not eating at all.
Yeah, she starts falling asleep in class. And so we sort of pivot to now this is about, it's not going to be a funny story of how do I keep myself from eating. This is like, taking on this issue of, the young people, especially young girls, getting this notion in their head that they need to lose weight at all costs.
Right.
And it's this thing of like, she says, what I eat and when I eat is my business, case closed. So that's sort of like my body, my choice thing.
Well, and the control issue, right? Like, that's again, there were some, when I was a cheerleader, there were a couple of girls on my squad who took to purging, and that it was always about, like, they would always kick back up again when they would go through a breakup, or they would start it up again if, like, their parents were getting divorced. It was always like coinciding with some other sort of thing in their life that made them feel out of control. But like, on my cheerleading squad, it was just like, oh yeah, so-and-so's throwing up again. Like, it was not a big deal. We weren't telling our parents. We weren't worried about each other. It was just like, hey, oh yeah, so-and-so's throwing up again. Like, just, we're going to keep an eye on her, but she's fine. She's got it under control. Like, and like, I think back on that now, that it was just such a normal thing that these girls that I knew were just gonna, throw up after every meal for a while.
Yeah. And this doesn't get into that. This just has her, this is more, I guess, like anorexia than bulimia, where she's just not eating at all. They sort of, I guess they have that confrontation that you mentioned earlier, where she says to Sam, like, I see you going through all of these model pictures and rejecting them because of their thighs and their hips and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then she says straight up, stop putting yourself down for being normal. And Patty says, how can I tell what normal is?
Right.
Which is, it's a little on the nose, but it's giving voice to exactly this topic that we've been talking about that's really kind of coming out in the open in the 90s. And then Sam shares her insecurities with Patty. She says, like, well, okay, maybe I'm not, worried about my weight, but I'm worried about my hair. I'm worried about this zit. It's this sort of standard sitcom reverse psychology where she starts saying all of this stuff that's bad about herself. Patty goes like, oh, Sam, first she starts saying that stuff isn't even real. I can't even see this it. But then she sort of moves into the, like, people like you because you're smart and fun and all, and who cares about all these physical things? And it's one of these, like,
and Sam's like,
heal
look
thyself.
in the mirror and say that to yourself.
Yeah.
And Patty's like, all right, touche. Like, I definitely have been caught in my own bullshit. Maybe I will have one of those enchiladas from the Mexican restaurant that I said no to earlier.
Yeah, this is definitely the sort of Full House style ending where, we can't be bleak and just sort of like go out on a joke like a Newhart or, Mary Tyler Moore. This is one where we need to learn the lesson and all that.
Yes.
And yeah, it is pretty much like, give yourself a break. Don't go crazy with the diets. And
And don't hold yourself to the standard of the fantasy, which is what you're seeing on television. And to be fair, like, I think this is, 86? Like, good on them for talking about that at this time. You know, like I think by the time we got into high school, we definitely were like analyzing media images for the messages they were sending. And that was definitely like, that was a thing that we did in school. Like it had already permeated into public schools at that point. So like, it's great that it's being talked about in the 80s because you just don't really think about that being in the like mind even in the 70s. Like you'll hear about it every now and then, but really it hasn't broken through to like the broader consciousness.
But it's funny how it is one of those things where like the growing awareness of it does not mitigate the growing like extremity of it. You know? So
it just went the other direction. It was like by the time we got into the early 2000s, because we're so aware of it, we can all be bros. Yeah, Girls Gone Wild.
It is one of the things like the SNL skit we just saw where it's like, oh, we all know that Amazon is evil. We're not going to stop buying from Amazon. It's that same thing of like, oh, we all know that we're like destroying the self-esteem of young girls everywhere, but like we're not going to stop.
But I don't want to see fatties on my bra commercials, which I totally feel that way, and that's awful.
Yeah. So again, it's sort of posing the question, like kind of raising the topic, and that's, you know, I agree. Good on them. You know, it's not solving anything.
It's going to take a time for us all to be better about this, I think.
Right on. Moving on to New Adventures of Old Christine.
Season 4, episode 20, He Ain't Heavy.
Yeah, we've talked about this show, I think, only once before on our Julia Louis-Dreyfus review.
Yep.
And I think we're both on record as liking it primarily for the cast. You know,
well,
Clark
we got
Gregg.
more Wanda Sykes in this episode, which we didn't in the last episode. You were like, wait, Wanda Sykes is in this show?
She wasn't in the one that we watched at all. But yeah, between Clark Gregg, Hamish Linklater, these are...
Oh my God. And at the beginning of this episode, you see nothing but Hamish Linklater's dong. He is wearing tight jeans, and they're talking about how he's gained weight. So they keep doing these like shots on his belly. He's wearing like a fake belly because he's like you. He's sort of like a famously lanky guy. He's got this like fake sort of padding on his belly, but they have him in like purposefully tiny jeans so that the belly sticks out a little more. But it is like you can see the full outline of his dong. And I was like that whole scene, and then one scene later on, I was like, whoa, can't stop looking at Hamish Linklater's dick.
I did not notice that.
Everybody go watch this show. You will all of a sudden think he's super hot.
I was curious if that was a fake tummy, because you know you can
tell later on when he starts exercising in it.
Yeah, I think by that point you can tell, but you could totally be, especially at that age, you could be a guy that comes across as skinny and lanky and still have a gut on you and just kind of wear it in a certain way.
Be that like what are they, like the skinny puffy guy, like that you can tell just drank a lot of alcohol in his 20s and 30s and he's got that like funky puff.
And half of it is just clothing, you know. You put him in something like this and you have him stick it out like that and you could totally exaggerate it. But anyway, this is going to start with, he's the character, Matthew.
We were talking about his belly when you said it, not his dong.
That is, yes. Okay, Thank you for clarifying.
Just wanted to clarify.
Matthew is Christine's brother,
younger brother, and everything comes easy to him.
Yeah, that's going to be the sort of the thrust of this story. This begins with him, you know, just like these other ones. I'm getting too fat. I need to lose weight. Right.
And she's so excited because her whole thing, she owns a gym. She owns that's her job. That's what she has.
So is that when she mentions that, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you didn't remember that from the other episode.
Does that play a big part of this? Because as the story goes on, like, it's revealed that she's not that good at this stuff.
Well, but it also is revealed the type of gym. So she owns like basically a Curves, which is like a gym for older women where they do low impact aerobics and then they have smoothies.
Right. And I was also curious when you say she owns it, like, I thought maybe, because again, not really remembering the premise and what her job is at all, like, is she some kind of entrepreneur that just owns a bunch of businesses and doesn't have any involvement?
No, she just owns this gym. She owns this one gym. She and Wanda Sykes, they run it.
Okay.
And that is, like, that's her life's work. And because it's a successful gym, then that's why she's able in that first episode to enroll Richie, her little son, in the private school. fuel because her business has done well. And so she's like, even though I'm a mess in my personal life and like a mess in life in general, like my business accidentally goes well. And so that's, she's moderately successful.
Yeah.
And so she says to Matthew, like, this is my life's work. My life's work is making people healthy.
Right.
I know all about the steps you're supposed to take to do this. Let's do this.
Yes. Another great sort of sitcom subtrope that we didn't get in the other ones. We got a little bit of it with Bob.
Yeah.
Of the sort of one character bringing another character into their world and kind of like, let me show you how to farm the corn or whatever.
Yeah. So she's like, okay, so the important thing is to do like isometrics and plyometrics and also get your heart rate up. And then when you are working out, it's important to drink protein because protein, she's like, it's like Pac-Man. It eats all your fat cells, which is totally wrong in some ways. Like I see where she's
going to proceed to have a lot more anti-science as we get into it.
So she like has this idea that like when you're working out, you got to also drink these like protein shakes. And so she makes these protein shakes. But what never gets mentioned is like the protein shakes are meant when you're doing strength training to bulk.
Yeah.
Like that's what they're really for. And so he ends up drinking them. And then she's like, and then you have to add like ice cream to them so they don't, and peanut butter so they don't taste bad.
Yeah. Later on,
so
she
they're
goes,
basically drinking these like high calorie milkshakes and barely sweating while they roll on the big blow up ball. It's not a medicine ball. It's one of the big like yoga balls.
Yes.
And they're not like, she's like, now it's time to break a sweat. And they're rolling on these balls, but they're drinking their shakes at the same time. So at the end of the few days, they both have gained weight.
Yeah, this is very much, it's basically the same humor as the Bob Newhart thing. We don't have a whole class of people, but the two of them on the exercise balls, first sans protein shakes and then with the protein shakes, it's more subtle. It's not the people flapping around like they were on Newhart, but the same kind of thing, just the physical comedy of the two of them sort of awkwardly bouncing and gyrating. He makes a comment. She says, like, watch me. And she starts sort of gyrating on the ball. And he says, I can't watch you. It's giving me conflicted feelings or something.
I'm getting confused feelings. I don't like to watch this.
So it's just the like physical comedy of them doing these like goofy movements. And of course, you've got him dressed up in the funny workout gear. Now, Julia Louis-Dreyfus is dressed up in very appealing workout gear.
Oh, yeah. She's got like Lululemon, but it's like early Lululemon.
This is where it started to dawn on me. I have a very age-appropriate sexual attraction to Julia, to this character, you know, and it was just really hitting me how much sexier she is in this than in Seinfeld.
Oh, yeah,
And
totally.
probably at the time that this first came out, I wouldn't have been like, ew, gross, but I would have just thought, oh, she's older now. So, because she's older than we are.
Yeah.
And so, if I was still in my 20s when this was on TV, I probably would have been like, oh, give me Elaine rather than Christine because she's just closer in age to me. Now I watch it and I see like, oh, seeing her with the nice hair and the nice clothes and all put together and everything, and not, like you're saying with Newhart, she's still way younger than I am now.
Yeah.
So just the whole package, I'm like, oh, yes, please. And as we start getting into the subsequent story, when we find out that Hamish Linklater's Matthew character has effortlessly lost weight, and Christine has gained weight, and they do that by giving her a little bit of a fake butt. Mm-hmm. I was like, turned on.
You like
this
the
looks
fake
great.
butt?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
They
that's
give it
so
to her
funny.
in stages.
Yes.
Right?
And I was feeling, that's so funny that you liked it because I was feeling attacked because like the way that like the last stage of her being like, the heaviest that she is, she has this like front gut that I totally have now. And I'm like, I'm feeling attacked. Julia Louis-Dreyfus doesn't have that front gut.
By the time they get to the end, it's still, she still looks good, but it's not flattering anymore.
No.
But honestly, that first instantiation where they just kind of patted her butt a little bit, just made it a little bit bigger, I'm like, fine, like it looks good to me. So Yeah, but she starts going crazy because she's gaining weight. And so unlike all the other characters...
And she's working out hard and harder and harder and harder as time goes on. And he stops. And Matthew starts going the other way. He starts like secretively eating and trying not to lose weight because he wants her to get a win.
Yeah, because she goes on this whole tirade where she says to him, you know, you'll lose weight without even trying. You're a therapist. You know, you got your degree as a therapist without even trying.
Mom and Dad love
favorite.
You
more. Yeah. And so it's this whole thing of she feels, and I'm sure it's, you know, a very common sibling dynamic, that she feels everything comes easy to him and she has to struggle for everything. And at least with the case of this getting in shape thing, she's right. She gained 5 pounds. So like you mentioned, her gym is like this sort of, like a social club for affluent women, basically. Yeah. And Wanda Sykes' character is like, no, I'll take you to a real gym, which is her boxing gym.
Yes.
You know, we've got the sort of montage of Christine and Wanda Sykes training a la Rocky, just like doing fun, you know, just little fun.
Throwing an actual medicine ball back and forth and all sorts of fun things happening. And she falls over a bunch and she really is like, I mean, the workout scene's like, she's hot in the workout scene. She's got like, they've got her greased up. She's all sweaty. You know, her arms are super toned. Like Julia Louis-Dreyfus is one of these very health conscious people. She was one of like the earliest adopters of like a vegan kind of diet or whatever. I mean, she's just like, she's super health conscious. She's also like super sustainable. You know what I mean? Like I learned from her that you should unplug your appliances and not leave them plugged in because it like draws energy. Yeah. I didn't know that. I saw her say it in an interview and like sometime in the 90s. And I was like, oh, I'll start unplugging my toaster when I'm not using it because Julia Louis-Dreyfus said it in an interview. But like I wonder, like this episode made me wonder about her like body self-image, because like the way they made her gain weight was natural in the way that they just kind of put it on a little bit here and there and here and there. And they didn't like put her in a big fat suit and make it over the top, which was good. I'm glad they didn't do that. But also it was a little bit like, I know she always plays these kind of weird characters like this that are always kind of, you know, wrong. And so, but like, I was a little like, do I need to worry that she like doesn't like women? Just because I felt like a lot of the sort of toxic body image things that we deal with were reinforced and not unpacked at all. Yeah. Not that New Christine is the place to do that, because she is always problematic and, you know, she's like, you know, always drinking too much and always a little bit of a mess and all these things. Okay. But yeah, I just kind of was like, ugh.
I see what you mean. What I will say is it's interesting how this one, you know, being probably over a decade, you know, maybe even 20 years later than the last one we talked about.
Yeah, this is 2009.
It's definitely not interested in those issues.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say it totally like falls into the traps the way Gimme a Break does. I think what it does, or what it's trying to be, is sort of like gender neutral by having the two of them go into it together, and by having it be so tied to their specific dynamic, and it be more about like, oh, you know, Christine is just a big, you know, nothing ever goes right for her and she has trouble with everything. And it's more about that.
Well, and they do make the comment about how it's harder for women as they get older to lose weight. Yeah. And like, so she's saying that, but they definitely are not like, they're not saying anything.
No. And they're
not that this would be the place.
No, but they're also, it's a different story where she thinks she's gaining weight and she's not. For better or worse, they chose to make it like she tries to exercise and she does actually get fatter.
Yeah, she gets heavier every single time she tries to exercise.
And so, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is like it sort of goes sideways and it's a sillier take on it.
No, it is. They're not trying to say anything, but because they weren't trying to say anything, I was kind of like, maybe they should try to say something.
Yeah, and then they get a lot of comedy from the old-timey scales that you get measured on in the doctor's office, the way that Wanda Sykes has to keep sliding over those big metal weight things, you know, and watching
like,
Julie.
That's always the hardest one, when they move that bottom weight. I don't know if you've ever had this, but the first time for me that, because I was always in that 100-pound range, because that bottom weight is 50. It's 50 more pounds.
Right.
So, and the top goes up to 49.
Yeah.
And when I tipped over the scale and went over 150, and that first time I was at the doctor that they had to move it to that third one, I started crying immediately. I was like, what is happening? Why? I should know. Get that one back over there.
Yeah, it is. It definitely has a lot more impact than the modern digital scale, just telling you the number. Yeah, seeing her react, like follow that little weight thing with her eyes is very funny.
Oh.
It's funny when
it was very real for me.
She's looking in the mirror at one point and she goes, do I have that disease where I can't tell that I'm skinny?
And they were like, no, you don't.
Now that you mention it, that's the one acknowledgement of the body dysmorphia concept in the show. And Hamish Linklater's like, nope, that's the one problem you don't have.
You definitely think you're great.
And so, yeah, Wanda sort of breaks it down at the end. She compares Christine to Sisyphus, right? She says, you're like that Greek guy that keeps pushing the ball up the mountain. And that kind of...
the stone up the mountain and then splat.
Yeah. She says, this is what it's like with your relationships and with everything else. That's why we love you, I guess. And so, again, it's tying it all to Christine's narrative. It's not trying to be a gendered thing or anything. It's more just like she's wed to calamity. If she tries to go this way, she'll go that way. If she tries to get in shape, she'll just gain weight. And that's sort of where we leave it, right? I don't have any notes after Wanda, tells her that she's like Sisyphus.
Exactly. And the end of the show is that she's put on all this weight and that she's just going to have to deal with it and keep working hard. And that's just the way life goes for you. Sorry, Christine. And then they have one final weigh in where after Matthew's been like eating, and then he doesn't gain any weight. He loses 5 more pounds. So in the course of like the month that this has been going on, he's lost 15 pounds. She's gained 15 pounds. And she's like, that's it. I'm done. I'm like Sam was. She's like, I'm going back to my old ways because I wasn't like when I was working out this. I wasn't working out this much before. I was fine.
Yeah, and which, by the way, if this were a more realistic show, you got to have Hamish Linklater's character get checked for like thyroid condition or something.
Exactly.
Like you got a tapeworm. You
got a tapeworm.
You can't have him eating.
We're worried about you.
Ice cream 5 times a day and losing weight. But yeah, I mean, look again. Very solid trope, I think. All of these have in one form or another, the character's sort of buffoonery of trying and failing to be disciplined, and that's something that basically everybody can relate to, even if it's not necessarily food or exercise. Yeah. And for most people, they can relate in one way or another to this issue with food or exercise. So what do we think? MVPs, good, bad ones, overall thoughts?
So I enjoyed going back to my sister Sam. Hadn't watched it in a long, long time. Obviously, it's been probably since it was in reruns. So in the late 80s was probably the last time I watched this. Huge nostalgia factor for me seeing that again. I had totally forgotten that it was, the main character, one of the main characters was from Mork and Mindy. I was like, oh yeah. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah, I always kind of like and am also sort of ho-hum about Bob Newhart. There's just like, he's ho-hum, but I still like...
He's doing his job if you feel ho-hum.
I kind of feel like that's, so I feel like that's the right response to that. Yeah, I don't know. I think nostalgia-wise, my sister Sam... But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that there was like a best show. Maybe that one, if any of them were going to tackle it, they tried. So I'll give them the nostalgia vote and the, good try vote.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. This is one, this lineup has the sort of like something borrowed, something blue, like every show kind of fills a different niche. I loved, the Bob Newhart show is, I don't know, this was a good story for him. You know, if we're going to watch Newhart once in a while, let's see him try to go to an exercise class. Let's see him have to go to a doctor and have to politely tell the doctor that he got his age wrong. The whole surprise party angle, all of that worked really well to me. And I sort of agree that, like, watching Bob Newhart is definitely never a chore, but it's also not necessarily one that I get super excited about. And so, I feel like that really kind of served its purpose. And then my Sister Sam one, I feel like that was good for the reasons we said of actually trying to, like, put some important ideas into the world and sort of react to what was going on and, say something. And for that reason, it hits that sort of Miller Boyette-esque nostalgia spot where it's like we can applaud them for having a good message, even if it's a little hackneyed. And we can kind of remember, this was what those sitcoms were like that we watched as kids. It always ends with some sappy scene where, Bob Saget tells you that, he'll always love you or whatever. And so, it works in that way. And then again, like, Christine, just the humor, I'll say the humor and the sexiness of, like, early 2000s Julia Louis-Dreyfus is, like, firing on all cylinders.
And Hamish Linklater's dong.
Yeah,
so.
Just feel like I am now empowered to be, like, lusting after this, like, 38-year-old woman. Just really liking what that does for it. And again, just seeing it, like, the people who cast this show did a great job, obviously, and I feel like nobody knew what they had at this time. That, these actors that, it's not like they're A-list movie stars now, but everybody knows, like, these guys really have the goods. Like, you'll see these guys in, Shakespeare in the Park or something.
Yeah.
Clark Gregg and Linklater.
Yeah, for
and so, they...
But I feel like even in 2009, like, I mean, Clark Gregg, at least for me, being a Sorkin player, was like a known quantity. I know he's gone on and done other things, and Linklater was already like an indie darling at that point, wasn't he?
He was on the way up.
He was on the way up. Okay.
And just because, frankly, they wouldn't be in this show in those roles, I think, if they were as successful as they deserve to be. No knock against.
But no, that was one of those things. Like, you got to think, being Julia Louis-Dreyfus, being in the industry since she was 19 when she was on SNL or something, like, she, she's been able to, like, watch people kind of on their way up, and I'm sure she was able to sort of handpick, like, Wanda Sykes is in this show. you know what I mean?
Definitely. So very canny casting, and this is where you kind of reap the rewards in an episode like this. But honestly, to me, I'm going to give my MVP to Gimme a Break for that.
Look at you.
Amazing, just the roller coaster of having it be, like, again, in contention for one of the most offensive and uncomfortable experiences we've ever had watching that first half. Not just the Porco Fat Club thing, but like I said, just how horrible the dad is to everybody.
Table,
and then seeing them, like, have to form this unholy alliance.
Oh, but that scene was so good.
Yeah.
Them, like, with the lasagna and the food, and, like, you're saying the ramping up, that was so funny.
Starting in the living room, watching TV, firmly committed to eating nothing but celery, and have it just get more and more out of control, and having the whole middle chunk of the episode, that full, 10, 12 minutes devoted to that, really fun. And again, just like unexpected, like, I felt like I had really been on a ride when I got to the end of it.
So what you're saying is that you're down to cover the Give Me a Break blackface episode where Joey Lawrence is in blackface.
I mean, I'm sure that will also be a roller coaster. So, yeah.
It's called, it was like one of the top 100 most surprising moments in television history or something like that.
Makes sense. I'm sure.
It's so unexpected. You're like, what? Why do we have a child in blackface?
Yeah. On that note, so much for the diet and exercise. What are we talking about next week?
Next week, we're going to catch you red-handed. We're talking about shoplifting. We're going to watch The Partridge Family, Season 3, Episode 22, The Partridge Connection. Facts of Life, Season 2, Episode 6, Shoplifting, Small Wonder, Season 2, Episode 11, The Shoplifter, and Home Improvement, Season 4, Episode 25, A Marked Man.
Yep, shoplifting's next week, and until then, we will consider this segment of the sitcom study concluded. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The Sitcom Study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.